Testing and Java EE didn't get along for a long bit of time. This was actually one of the weakest points for J2E. There's two reasons for that. One was J2, at the time J2E was created, TDD and things like testing weren't as much the focus as it has become of late. For that reason, a lot of the APIs really weren't geared towards testing per se. Okay. However, that was J2E. In Java EE, things have actually changed enormously. Right? I've been doing TDD with Java EE since Java EE5, so things have come a long way, and things are very, very testable. In fact, as you'll see, it's probably one of the best testable frameworks out there for various reasons, because it has been a focus both from the community standpoint as well as from the API standpoint. One of the tools that really makes this shine and really makes this effective is Arquillian. And Arquillian's been around for a little while, and again, I've used Arquillian for about 3 years. I was one of the early adopters of Arquillian. There's other solutions out there, but frankly, if you're going to be testing Java EE applications, Arquillian is probably your best bet. So you don't have to look around too much, in my opinion. In this talk, I will be focusing more on developer testing, principally unit and integration testing. Okay. However, Arquillian is much more than that. As you'll see, the fundamental building blocks of Arquillian is such that you can do far more than just integration and developer testing. You can write things like performance tests and system tests using Arquillian as well. So it's a nice Swiss Army knife for testing. If testing is something your organization is focused on, really this is a very, very good thing to use. Principally though, Arquillian really does excel at integration testing and creating good regression testing suites. And that's what I've used Arquillian principally for. Right? So to create a testing suite around your application such that you can apply agile refactoring and the like in a confident fashion. Also, I will be primarily focusing on JUnit today. Okay. Arquillian though supports much more than JUnit. So if you happen to be using TestNG, that's also supported by JUnit, and it supports a few other frameworks like JDK. Okay, so if you're doing BDD, Arquillian will support that as well. So what exactly, why exactly is testability of Java EE applications a lot more improved from J2E? I think this is worth spending a little bit of time exploring before we kind of dig into more of the code and more of the details. So as a matter of fact, there's various factors and tools and capabilities in Arquillian and beyond that go along in terms of making every single layer of Java EE applications testable. At the very base level, Servlet is testable principally because it exposes a well-known API. Right? So because Servlet's at the end of the day talk HTTP, anything on the testing side, anything that can produce HTTP input and output, can test a servlet, and that's what basically the tools take advantage of. In particular, what I will show you today is how you can test servlets using the JAX-RS client API. Now, you might be thinking, okay, JAX-RS is for REST-based development, and that's the API for that. How does this apply to servlets? As a matter of fact, the way I see it, the JAX-RS client API is really nothing much more than a higher-level abstraction over an HTTP client. So that makes it actually a very good candidate for testing servlets. So I would say that is the de facto thing that makes servlets testable. Similarly, for JSF 2.0, what makes things testable is the fact that it is an MVC framework. So you can decouple the view from the component, namely the view and the model and the action handlers. That means that if you really wanted to, you could test the action handlers and the view in isolation or together. Okay, so that's a powerful feature that often in a lot of other web frameworks that doesn't exist quite as clearly. And things in Arquillian in particular that takes advantage of that are three things: Drone, Graphene, and Warp. And we'll talk about the details of each of those and see how they help you test JSF applications in particular. On the CDI and EJB layers, you actually have quite a bit of capabilities. CDI because of the fact that it's generic dependency injection, really increases the middle tier testing capabilities quite a bit. There's quite a bit of features in CDI itself that's geared towards testing. Similarly, because CDI integrates with EJB3, that by transitively also makes EJB3 extremely testable as well. JPA is also testable on its own right, and there's some specific tooling that makes it easier. So if you are testing JPA, you should definitely look at using embedded databases, and we'll talk about why that is, as well as a tool called JUnit, which also integrates with Arquillian. And I'll talk a bit about JUnit as well. Finally, you have things on the protocol or interface layers beyond Servlet. So these days, JAX-RS for REST-based development, and perhaps for some of you, WebSocket. And again, the very nice thing that makes these things testable is that they talk a standard language, a standard protocol. In case of JAX-RS, it's just REST over HTTP, and in case of WebSocket, it's the WebSocket API that's included in HTML5. And similar to servlets, essentially there are client APIs that are included in Java EE, namely JAX-RS client API, as well as the WebSocket client API that makes it makes these APIs very easy to test. Okay. So that's a bit of background. Moving on, let's begin into more of the details and take each of these layers one at a time to see how they are actually testable. So as I mentioned, JAX-RS to client API is what I will be showing you in conjunction with Arquillian in order to test servlets. However, I also want to mention a few things here. If you didn't want to go the JAX-RS to client API route, there are some other options as well. And I'll talk in more detail when I show you the code, what these are and how they sort of differ from the JAX-RS client API. But for your reference, your alternatives there, if you didn't want to use the JAX-RS client API, is a couple of open source projects called JUnit and HTMLUnit. Okay? And these are purpose-built for unit testing, as you can see from the name. So the traditional problem in testing servlets in Java EE is the fact that they're container-bound components. Right? So the life cycle of the servlet is only comes alive when you put it in the container. So in unit testing, you're in a different world from the container, if you will. Right? You're running the test from JUnit or testng, or perhaps bootstrapping those tests from your build environment or perhaps your CRE environment. So the basic problem in container build testing is twofold. One is that you need those components to be deployed to a container for them to be testable in a realistic fashion. And also, you need control over that container somehow. You need to be assured that that container is running, or it's started if need be, and perhaps also shut it down if need be. And this is precisely what the problem that Arquillian fundamentally solves. Okay, and we'll see why. So all of my code today that I'll be showing you is actually on GitHub. It's at that URL. And actually, this presentation is also on SlideShare. I'll show you the SlideShare URL for that as well. I have tried to make the code very, very self-contained. Okay, so my goal really is for me to show you the code today and discuss some of the aspects of the code and explain some of it. But by and large, you should be able to, after doing this talk, go and take a look at the source code, download it, and run it yourself. Okay, that's at least what I'm trying to accomplish. Also, before I move on too far ahead, I want to also show you where this presentation itself is. It's in SlideShare. So it's simply slideshare.net and my name separated by the underscore and slash presentations. Pardon me. So these are all of the talks I actually have. This particular talk is the one we're talking about today. So definitely you can use that as well. All right. So without further ado, I'm going to start showing you the code. All right. So here's the code that I have. It's a simple Maven project that I've opened up in NetBeans. Don't be too scared when you look at the POM file. It's a bit more than what you typically would see in a Java EE project. Right? in a Java EE project, you typically just have one big dependency, the Java EE jar, and that's pretty much it. There is a bit more going on in this POM XML file. I will go through what's going on here with you, but just to prepare you, it's a bit more involved in your usual Java EE POM file. Okay, so the project itself, actually, you can run on its own. Right? So I'll actually run the project for you. Okay, and I'll show you the servlet that we're going to go ahead and test. So the servlet URL is this. It's Action Bazaar, which is a name-based application, name of the WAR file. The servlet is bound to alerts, right? And it takes one query parameter called user ID. Right? So this, I'll access this URL. What is generated here is a JSON payload. It's fairly simple. So I have a greeting, right? And I have a goodbye message. And then I have an array of alerts. Okay, so each alert is basically the user and some text describing what the alert is. Similarly, the servlet itself is very simplistic as well. So here it is. It's called alert servlet. It should be fairly easy to find. I've tried to organize the application code a little bit, so everything that's on the web layer is in the web package. So here's our servlet here. If you haven't seen a servlet tree style servlet before, this is how it looks like. Right? It's an extended HTTP servlet, and it has an annotation called @WebServlet. You give it a name and a URL pattern that it's bound to, in this case, alerts. In servlet 3, you actually don't need a web XML if you don't want to, right? In my case, I do have a web XML, but I don't actually declare the servlets there. The servlets are just declared by annotations. In this case, I'm setting the response type application /JSON, and I'm actually generating the JSON itself using the Java API for JSON processing. Okay, that was included in Java EE 7 to help you process JSON on the server side. So I'm using in particular the DOM or object style JSON processor. So I'm creating a object here and basically iterating through and generating a hard-coded set of alerts that I have, and finally dumping my output out into the output stream, servlet output stream that I'm getting a handle to here, and that's it. Right? That's as simplistic as my servlet is. Now, here's my actual test to go ahead and test the servlet. I'll run the test first, and then I'll show you what the test is actually doing. What I've tried to do here is follow the conventions I usually use for my TDD projects. So the tests basically mirror the packaging conventions in the application. Right? So the test for a test servlet is right here, and also in the interfaces web package. I'll call it alert servlet test. To basically prepending the word test, to the component that's being tested. So now what I will do is I will right-click and say test file. What this will do is it will actually go through Maven, do a build of the project, and run every single test. Okay, the build, which this time shouldn't be very much at all. And then just the test, the alert servlet test. What I will do is I have the GlassFish console in a tail utility out here. So notice what is going on here. There's actually, it's too fast to quite capture it, but what is actually happening here is that I'm deploying an application onto GlassFish. Right? This is a GlassFish instance that is running outside of JUnit. Okay, so there's the deployment. The deployment is done now, and the test should be running right there. Notice that it says action was our servlet test. Okay, so that is the actual var that was deployed. And it took about 9 seconds to deploy. For some reason, this is taking longer than expected. I must have my virus scanner turned on or something. So you'll also notice that the application GlassFish was also shut down. Right? So what we did here is actually go through start GlassFish, deploy the application, run the actual servlet, and then shut down GlassFish. And now, with that in mind, I'll show you the code first as to what was actually run in the unit test. So here we go. Notice that this is a JUnit test. You know that because there's the add test annotations, right? So that's defining a JUnit test. Beyond that, the first thing that you'll notice is that we are enriching this JUnit test with Arquillian. Right? So that's what the run with Arquillian annotation means. What this means is that Arquillian takes over control of this JUnit test. Okay, JUnit is running it, but it runs through Arquillian. Arquillian is actually in charge of starting and stopping this test. I'll explain the add deployment annotation method in a moment, but let's first take a look at the test itself. I actually just have just one test in this particular unit test. So what it is doing is that it is creating an instance of a JAX-RS client. So remember the JAX-RS client API that I talked about? The JAX-RS client API was added in Java E7. It is basically very much, as I mentioned, just a high-level abstraction of HTTP. Right? So here's the client API that's being created, and then what I'm doing with this client is I'm connecting up to a URL. In particular, the URL that I'm connecting to is localhost 4880, which is a running GlassFish instance in my case. I'm connecting up to an application called Action Bazaar Servlet Test, and then I'm connecting up to the URL/alerts. In the next line, I'm setting a query parameter, just like I was doing in the browser, right? So I'm setting the user ID query parameter to be 111, and then I'm finally doing a GET request. In the GET request, I'm assuming that the payload is JSON, and we know that this is true because a servlet is generating JSON code for us. And then all I'm really doing is something very, very simple. I'm just looking to see if I have 5 elements in my alerts. And this could, of course, be a lot more elaborate in that it could look at the actual HTTP content to see does it have the correct body, does it have the correct headers and all of that. And you can do that if you so wish. Now the question is, when we do this, right? This is by itself is not terribly remarkable, right? I mean, you could do this in a unit test on your own without much trouble. But as I mentioned, the big challenge is ensuring that the application server is up and running, right? And also deploying what you're testing and undeploying it. And this is precisely what Arquillian actually does. So with this Arquillian annotation, I am running a GlassFish instance remotely, right? So because of this Arquillian annotation, in this case, when I run this unit test, Arquillian makes sure that there is a running GlassFish instance. If there isn't one, it will go ahead and start the running GlassFish instance. And then at the end of the test, or at the end of the test suite, it will actually shut down the GlassFish instance.
Now, you know, there must be some configuration behind that annotation.
There is, yeah. Absolutely, and I'll show that in a second. The other thing that Arquillian does is that it actually deploys the code that you are testing. If you haven't, if you sort of come from a different framework background, what those frameworks tend to do is they deploy everything, right? So they deploy, the entire application that you need to test, and then run your tests against that. Arquillian does the opposite, right? So what you do in Arquillian by default is that you only deploy the artifacts that you are going to test. And basically what this allows is two things. One is more control over what you're testing, right? So you're specifically controlling the proportions of the application that you want to test. Number two, it makes the deployment a lot faster, right? If you're deploying, the entire application, that can take longer as opposed to just deploying whatever it is that you need to. So that is the purpose of this particular method. In this case, I've called it create deployment. And you tell Arquillian that the purpose of this method is to describe what you're deploying via the add deployment animation. Okay. And then in this method, you basically return the type of artifact that you want to deploy. You can deploy WAR files, jar files, EJB jars. You can even deploy XML fragments if you need to do that for your application server. For example, in WebLogic, we have these deployment units just for data sources. Right? So you can deploy much more than that. Basically, anything that the app server supports, you can return that from your add deployment application. And in fact, you can have multiple related add deployment applications. So you can, if you so wish, deploy multiple artifacts as well in order. Okay. But in this particular case, I'm doing something very, very simple. I'm just creating a servlet called, or rather a WAR file called actionservlet.test, right? And the only contents of that that WAR is just my servlet class. Okay, so it's extremely isolated as to what it is that I'm testing. The way you can create these web archives by hand, right? So you can create an instance of a new web archive and manipulate this web archive object by yourself. But that's generally not what Arquillian wants you to do. Arquillian has this nice builder utility called shrink-wrap, right? And its purpose is really to build, in a programmatic fashion, these descriptors, these bar files or EJB jar files or what have you. So in this case, I'm creating using that shrink-wrap factory, right, to create my WAR file, okay, the description of my WAR file, and then just adding one class to it. And basically, this is going in the web.lib classes directory again. So that is basically how Arquillian knows what to deploy. Right? So it is deploying that artifact, and hence, when you hit this unit test, you are able to say deterministically that you have a deployed application and a deployed component that you can test against. Containers to run against in Arquillian is a separate file called arquillian.xml. I'll show you that in a second. So it can be anywhere in your class path, right? I recommend putting it in test resources. It has to be in the root of your scan class path, but this is how it looks like. It's a relatively simple file, and there's various configurations that Arquillian supports, right? So you need to internally configure it for the particular container that you're testing against. And in fact, you can test against multiple containers as well. So you can configure multiple containers, and at runtime, you can determine what container that you're actually testing against. In my case, I'm telling Arquillian that I want to run against what's called a managed container, and we'll talk about that in a second. But basically, here's the settings for that. So I'm saying that GlassFish is installed in C drive GlassFish 4.1. It's running on localhost. 4848 is the admin port, and I have an admin user and an admin password that I've set for this GlassFish instance. The other thing you should be aware of is the POM XML file. So let's take a look at that for just a second. And that's part of, and I guess don't worry too much. Generally, you can take whatever I've specified here, especially if you're using GlassFish, and just go with that. So you don't have to muck with this too much. That's part of what I wanted to accomplish here as well. So the first thing you need to do is declare dependency on the Arquillian BOM itself. So this is everything that you need for Arquillian. And in addition to that, there's a dependency on shrink-wrap, which is the API that I was using to build the WAR file itself. I'm also using an Arquillian extension called drone, and we'll talk about this in a second as well. Right, so you need that particular dependency as well. There's of course the Java EE API dependency that you usually would have for a Java EE project, and I have a few more like the Servlet core that I need to use, and JUnit of course. But things like JUnit or the test scope, and even Arquillian itself is actually in the test scope. And that's it, really, in terms of what you need to do. The key thing here is that I'm specifying that the specific container I'm using in this case is GlassFish, Arquillian GlassFish managed 3.1. Right? So this is your adapter for your container. There are several different modes for Arquillian. So Arquillian supports an embedded mode, a managed mode, and a remote mode. I'll explain what the differences are. In embedded mode, which there is a connector for GlassFish embedded for that to do that. The container is actually started in the same JVM as the unit test. Okay, so it's, the lifecycle of the container is the same as the lifecycle of the unit test. In managed mode, basically Arquillian controls the lifecycle of the container, but the container is running external to the current JVM. Right? So as I said earlier, it's making sure that GlassFish manages is up and running. If it's not, it's going ahead and starting GlassFish manager, shutting it down when the test or the test suite is run. In remote mode, actually Arquillian just assumes that there's a container up and running. Right?
I assume you can deploy to multiple clusters, whatever size clusters, and it'll.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. You can absolutely do that. You can do those settings.
Specify whatever.
Yeah. Yep. You can do that as well via Arquillian. But in remote mode, which would be a cluster, for example, Arquillian just assumes that the GlassFish instance is just up and running, right, somewhere, and it doesn't really do anything with the container beyond just deploying the artifact or undeploying the artifact, the test artifact that you're testing. So in this case, I'm using GlassFish managed. It sort of shows off what Arquillian is doing, so it's easier in terms of explaining things. In production, I actually recommend using the remote mode. The reason I recommend the remote mode is when you're using the remote mode, basically what happens is all of the time that it takes to start up and shut down the container, that basically goes away. Right? So all you really have is the time it requires to do a deploy and undeploy. So that minimizes the work the time that you need to get a test suite running and going. Okay, that is, I think, all I need to talk about in terms of the WAR file. The rest of it is sort of mechanics that you can take a look at by yourself. Any questions on any of this so far?
In the Arquillian XML, can you pick up the NetBeans project properties as well? So NetBeans project, you say which application is you're going to use. Can you use those same substitution variables?
I don't think so, because what happens is Arquillian is actually not part of it. It's running the Maven build, so all of your Maven substitutions will work there. But the Arquillian.xml file is not actually in that deployed artifact or part of that build per se. It's actually just what Arquillian is actually doing is it's reading it from the class file.
Okay.
right? Not from that deployed artifact. So the substitutions I don't think would work there. However, you could ask that question in the Arquillian forums. Maybe they have a way of doing that.
Just try to get back in.
Yeah, but remember, oh, so I didn't cover this, but remember you can have multiple instances of the container. So let's take a look at that Arquillian .xml file in another second. Maybe I should explain this a bit better. So in this setting, notice that you have a section called container, and you're defining what that container is. And the qualifier can be absolutely anything that you want. Right? So you could call it GlassFish 1, 2, 3, 4. And in that way, you can have multiple configurations, container configurations built in here. In the very simple case that I'm demonstrating, there is just one container setting. So if I don't do anything else, Arquillian will just say, hey, I just have one container setting, this is what I'm going to use. If you had multiple ones, you would actually have to specify via Maven property or Maven profile, which container you're actually wanting to use. And so you do have configurability in that sense. Any other questions on the basics of the nice thing about the servlet example is it allows me to basically talk about the mechanics of Arquillian itself.
What do you get with, say, deploy fails?
When the deployment fails, unfortunately, you'll get a failed test, but you will get the Arquillian will parse out as best as it can the error that you received and put that and report that via JUnit. So, for example, in a CI build, if you have this running via Hudson or Jenkins, at least you're getting somewhat meaningful error telling you, okay, what is it that occurred? And for example, when I first tried to run it, you got that error message to say, hey, your container is already running, and you're trying to run this in management mode. Okay. Any other questions? No? All right, moving on.